Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Russia's strategic grasp over Armenia and how to overcome it, which will, of course, be one of the central questions that we want to discuss today. My name is Sonja Schiffers, and I'm the director of the Heinrich Boell Foundation South Caucasus office. And I'm glad that you all joined us today and that our excellent speakers joined us today, and I will introduce them in a minute. As most of you are probably aware, Armenia's relations with Russia have undergone significant changes since the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War and Russia's failure to enforce the implementation of the ceasefire agreement, and especially since the forced displacement of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians in 2023 and the full establishment of control over Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan. Armenia is tacitly or not so tacitly moving away from Russia and towards the European Union, while at the same time, the head of Armenia's National Security Council emphasized at an international conference in Yerevan this summer that Armenia is not necessarily pivoting to the West, but pivoting to the world. Clearly, Russia is not happy about these developments, and its propagandists and officials threaten Armenia on a daily basis. What are Russia's leverages over Armenia? How could they be used to threaten Armenia? And how can Armenia free itself from the Russian grip? Can it? This webinar forms the final activity of our cooperation project with the Regional Center for Democracy and Security based in Yerevan. And we're happy to present the results of the excellent study conducted by RCDS over the past few months. First, Karina and Tigran from RCDS will present their findings. Then I will hand over to Sergei Lagodinsky, member of the European Parliament and co-chair of the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. And finally, we will hear from Mane Adamian, expert on strategic partnership with the EU, former Deputy Minister of the Economy and advisor to Deputy Prime Minister Mikhail Grigoryan. We will keep it short today, and we'll have around 25 minutes for questions and answers if everyone sticks to their timing. So feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A tool below already during the presentation so that we can get ready for your questions. And we plan to end on time at 4 p.m. or shortly after 4 p.m. which time zone? Brussels time. So without further ado, I hand over to Karina and then to Tigran. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonja. Thank you to everyone joining and for this opportunity to present our research. I'm just going to go ahead and share the screen for the slides. And just to kind of mention, this is a short presentation, so it's going to be kind of a jog through our main findings. But I hope whatever I don't get to, Tigran will kind of fill in gaps, and then we can fill in the rest of it through Q&A with our guests. So this project was carried out in this overall context of Armenia's political move towards the West, when it became clear to analysts that this was happening even as Armenia's economic architecture was in fact becoming more dependent on Russia. And the background to these changing political reasons are mainly in the realm of security. And specifically two events, the September 2022 attacks in Armenia by Azerbaijan, and the September 2023 ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. So we wanted to look at the specific areas of dependencies. Where are they? What sort of actionable steps can be taken to mitigate and address these dependencies? And here's just, a few of the major ones here on this slide. Russia-led frameworks, EURASTO, etc. Our main policy recommendations are kind of comprise these two areas. So in terms of trade and energy, it's trade really is export diversification, and for security, it's security diversification. Oops. So over the past 6 years, Armenian exports to Russia have grown at an impressive annual rate of 32.8%. So it's rising from $572 million in 2017 to 3.41 billion in 2023. But recent trends show a decline. Armenian exports to Russia are expected to increase, already recorded from January to April, due to Armenia diversifying trade, kind of, in the context of this kind of vulnerability, but rather because of the weaker exchange rate between the dram and the ruble, reduced re-exports, and Russia's diversification of imports, which has lowered that short-term demand for Armenian products. Food and trade vulnerabilities, there's a few major ones that I wanted to identify and that we did in the report, and particularly around food security. So our findings show that Armenia is heavily dependent on Russian imports, specifically for wheat and vegetable oil. And a shortage of wheat or a sudden spike in bread prices is, widely kind of understood in basic political science to lead to serious political unrest. So that's considered a major vulnerability. What's not on this slide that I wanted to mention is that we actually found, and we're quite surprised to find, high self-sufficiency products in Armenia. So, products that Armenia can kind of cover domestically. And I just want to mention some of them, the food products. They're potatoes, vegetables, fruits and berries, eggs, mutton and goat meat, and fish. So for the most part, that's around 100%. Some are slightly more, some are slightly less. And why Russia remains a key trade partner. Armenian producers have advantages in exporting to Russia. There's a diverse product range, the market familiarity is there, and a shared language. And expanding to new markets really requires improved manufacturing, marketing, and HR support, which is obviously a long-term process. Here are a couple of our main recommendations for food security. So subsidizing grain prices to support local producers to compete with Russian imports. And the second point, which is you can see on the map there, there's a lot of uncultivated land that could be used for wheat cultivation, which would address obviously that the wheat food security vulnerability, which would boost domestic production and kind of fill in that need. Another recommendation is understanding consumer needs in Europe and the Middle East, just because they're geographically obviously closer. Investing in human capital to enhance market diversification efforts, export more agricultural products. And what the government's role here could be to help local producers explore new markets, strengthening ties with Gulf countries, negotiating new transit fees with Iran, that, just like obvious steps that could be taken to facilitate this trade diversification, and this in terms of finding new export markets. Energy dependency is another key area that we looked at. Just a couple notes on this. I mean, you can see the bullet points here, but Armenia's electricity production is fairly diversified. Armenia has thermal, hydro, nuclear plants, and the problem though is that thermal and nuclear plants actually rely heavily on Russia, as Armenia imports gas and uranium for running the thermal and nuclear plants. Armenia's energy dependence on Russia is really a complex issue that can't be easily resolved. It's a long-term process, and I think I'll probably keep repeating that, and my colleague Digan will as well. But I just wanted to mention, critics who view this reliance as a kind of failure of Armenia to modernize, or this kind of sign of foolishness, kind of overlooking the structural challenges involved in making that diversification happen. Understanding these complexities that we're pointing out here is crucial for appreciating the challenges involved in pursuing energy dependence, trade dependence, and kind of addressing them. Key recommendations for energy production, domestic energy production, modernizing the power plants that already exist, developing a new nuclear power plant with new partners, which is already ongoing, and you can see more about that in the report. Expanding renewable energy capacity, particularly solar power, which has a lot of potential in Armenia, and exploring export opportunities for excess production. And obviously, energy efficiency is a big part of kind of maintaining that those gains. So implementing this, I'm not going to go into the specific frameworks for this, but increased energy efficiency and encouraging adoption among the population for energy efficient technologies. One of the key recommendations that we heard kind of over and over from the experts that we spoke to is constructing high voltage transmission lines between Armenia and Iran, as well as Armenia, Georgia, to connect with the north-south energy corridor. And the second point we also heard from different experts is synchronizing electrical networks with Georgia, in particular, to stabilize the grid and enhance power exchange. So we're moving on to the security component of this report. Obviously, Armenia has a historical security dependence on Russia. And here in this kind of line at the bottom, you can see the main developments in this relationship of security dependence, the joint border protection, going all the way to CSTO membership from 1994. So of Armenia's arm imports has actually plummeted. So this is the one area which we see, real-time change and diversification, in contrast to the trade and energy. So security is a completely different kind of field that, in terms of this dynamic. So it's plummeted from 96% to less than 10% in just 4 years. So since the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War. And this dramatic shift highlights Armenia's willingness to secure weapons from more reliable sources, even if they come at a higher cost, to enhance its security. And we have identified the Czech Republic, Greece, signing military cooperation agreements with Armenia. Not on this slide, perhaps on the other slides, I can't remember. India and France also are major sources of Armenian arms now, like imports. And we've seen cooperation with the United States having increased in terms of military education, joint exercises, advisory support. So these partnerships overall kind of, point to this directive, this direction that Armenia is taking towards more reliable sources. This is transitioning to new defense systems is a key aspect of this. Armenia's, even despite Armenia's efforts to diversify its defense partnerships, its military still heavily relies on Soviet or Russian weapons. And these weapons will need Russian standard ammunition, spare parts, components for years to come. So even despite these changes and, increasingly procuring weapons from sources like India and France. Shortages in these supplies, these Russian Soviet supplies, could weaken Armenia's defense. So reducing this reliance will take time, money, and a careful choice of new partners. And this is where the Czech Republic specifically and India become even more important. Because as we found in our research, specialists from these two countries in particular specifically have the experience and the skills for the ongoing maintenance, repair, and training in using Soviet and Russian weapons. There's challenges to this, of course. Switching to new standards and calibers presents challenges like retraining personnel and integrating these new defense technologies. So this will require major reforms across the military and a strategic approach to hiring and training specialists to meet Armenia's changing defense needs. And during this transition, the army may be using both Western and Soviet Russian weapons at the same time. this presents its own challenges because it could make it harder to unify the military and maintain Russian equipment without that Russian support. So our recommendations on this are deepening defense partnerships, particularly with India and the Czech Republic, as their specialists could provide that support, ongoing support as the transition moves forward. Gradually replacing Soviet Russian equipment with these technologies from new partners. Military reforms, which are already ongoing. Comprehensive military reforms, focusing on personnel retraining and developing a strategic plan for interoperability between Russian and Western equipment during that kind of mixed transition time. And that's a kind of quick overview of the findings in the report, and we'll be able to get into much more detail during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karina. Tigran, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Karina. I think we need to understand several very important things as a result of this report. The first one, Karina was mentioning during her presentation, that all of these problems are long-term problems. So these solutions are also long-term. It is kind of nice to expect that Armenia could achieve even some of this goal in the short run. To be honest, when we started conducting this research, we started talking to lots of economists and former government officials. We were more skeptical before starting the research than we are now. At this point, at least there is an understanding that certain things could be done to mitigate the dependency. For example, when it comes to agricultural products, there have been a lot of really good recommendations by several experts saying, for example, Armenia should prioritize the processing industry, so it's easier to export these programs. All of our respondents also emphasize the need to find a place in the Gulf market as a real alternative to the Russian market. But here, of course, the infrastructure is the problem. Karina mentioned about high transit fees through Iran, also the lack of air transport. So when it comes to these kind of solutions, the government should take a more proactive stance, because the producers, the entrepreneurs, they are at times, and not at times probably, they are in some sort of a comfort zone, and they do not have the economic incentive to look for new markets, because the Russian market is a very convenient one. They're quite known there, their products are quite known there. And it's the government's responsibility, if there is such a strategic goal to mitigate this one-sided dependency on Russia, to provide incentives to the producers, to the manufacturers, and to the entrepreneurs to move in these directions. There are a lot of practical recommendations in the report as well. I would recommend everybody to read the full report, because it's very difficult to present all the findings in this very limited format. But I think the main conclusion should be Armenia should do its homework. It all depends on the Armenian governments, but also we need to also understand the limitations. There are areas where there are no real alternatives. Like when we are talking about gas, of course, there is this Iranian option, and several experts mentioned that we could increase the volume of Iranian gas coming, but some other experts are saying it's not technically possible because of the state of the pipeline. We should also understand that these pipelines are also owned by Russia. So it's a very complex situation. We shouldn't be looking at this issue through black and white lenses. It's a very complicated, sophisticated, and long-term process. I'll probably stop here, and we could touch upon other aspects of the publication during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Tigran. I would then hand over to Sergei Lagodinsky, and I would ask you to comment on the report and what you've just heard from the perspective of someone, an MP at the European Parliament now dealing with the region, broadly speaking, but also Armenia, of course. How does it make you feel? Or do you think the European Union has the right instruments at its disposal to support Armenia in this diversification process? And maybe also more broadly speaking, which potential threats from Russia do you see, having worked on Russia for a long time? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me, and it's great, dear colleagues, to see you here. And I hope for a fruitful cooperation also in my new capacity. I think what we're talking here about is basically a national transition project, a transition or transformation of a whole society. The four dimensions that I see here is, first of all, diversification that was explained in this report in very good terms. I would like to have a report, if I may, as well. Number two, and the second dimension, I think, which is just as important, is democracy, sustaining or democratization of Armenia. And by that, I don't mean that we are not, that Armenia is not a democratic country, but of course, we can always work on improving also European countries, but kind of this moving towards a stable parliamentary liberal democracy. And number three is the issue of regional integration in a broader sense. And with that, I mean, of course, also prospects of improvement of relationship with Turkey. Because I think that if we're looking at the dynamics in the region, I think that the relationship with Turkey could be a key on many dimensions. I don't have to explain to you, of course, vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, but also vis-a-vis the situation and the dynamics with Russia. And having been chair of EU-Turkey delegation for the past 5 years, I do sense a general change and a general shift, and I think it's a genuine shift on behalf of the Turkish government structures on those issues, despite the rhetorics, etc., etc. The risks that I see are basically threefold. Number one, it's a time factor. And if we are talking about the risks vis-a-vis Russia, we have kind of a discrepancy. On the one hand, we have a situation where for geopolitical, and to mitigate geopolitical risks, the shifts should also actually be very fast. But what you are describing is precisely that it's not possible, and that the diversification process is very slow. So we have a tension which can be very risky under those circumstances. Number two is the interference factor. And the recent coup attempt, as reported by Armenian authorities, is just one example of the risks that we're seeing here. I don't have to explain to those who know both Russia, but also the Armenian society, where the risks are there. And number three is the security factor vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, where there is still no clarity whether the security of Armenia can be guaranteed, despite Armenian coming forward in a very, very constructive way in the recent months and years. So there we have kind of a matrix of topics and risks. And I think that one way of dealing with this is, number one, the EU should, of course, support and embrace the transformation of Armenia. And this is something that we say again and again, also in our resolutions, but we have to do it in a clever and a way. And I think that the Armenian leadership is doing it in a way that maybe would not satisfy my ambitions, but satisfies the wisdom of the geopolitical context. And this is what I would call a strategic ambiguity that you are still trying to demonstrate. Because this is, from my perspective, the only way on your side, how to bridge this gap between the fast transformation that you want to achieve and the slow diversification and interference risks that we have on the other side. So here you will have to be wise, and you are, and also the European Union has to be wise. We have to explain and to signal that it is not our EU geopolitical interests or anything like that we're playing, that this is more of a support for a nation to make a free choice of its future development. And this should be the starting point and kind of the cornerstone of our position, because as soon as we are introducing any geopolitical ambitions here, we are inviting the outside forces about whom we're talking for unfriendly acts. So the balancing act that we will be having is indeed along those lines, and your report, I think, makes it very clear that the risks are there and in which direction we should be going. In April 24, the EU announced a significant investment in Armenia, 270 million as far as I remember. And this is the way to go. We will need to see how we talk about potential EU candidacy or some closer ties. I would prefer talking about closer ties with a very long-term perspective of EU candidacy for reasons that I described before. So it's actually, it's a dance. But from our perspective, from the perspective of European Union, it must be very clear that we are interested in stronger economy, stronger governance structures, a stronger connectivity that you also mentioned in this report that is very, very important and very timely to discuss those issues, and also stronger society. Nothing in this list threatens any neighbors or any regional partners and actors. And quite to the contrary, that could make Armenia to the anchor of stability in the region, especially with Georgia going ways we don't know after the upcoming elections. So this is a chance for us stabilizing the region, pacifying the region, increasing the constructive role of actors like Turkey in the region. This is the role that the EU should be playing, and everything else we will be building step by step in the upcoming future. I think this is something that I take also from your report, and this is something that we, I think, all together should develop in a wise, strategic way in the upcoming years. But yes, what is for sure, what is clear, is that the EU is on the side of democratic, stable, and peaceful government and society, and majorities, also if you look at the polls, of the Armenian society. We don't have any other option. We must be on your side on that.
Thank you very much, Sergey, for this very clear input and feedback to the report. I would like to invite Mane in now and ask you about your analysis or your reading of the report, and also where you see potential challenges when it comes to the implementation of the recommendations. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues, for the report and for having me. Well, I think we have to, first of all, highlight here that the issue in the economic sense is Armenia's over-reliance on a single state. And in this case, it's Russia. It could be any other state. It would still be an issue, and we have to talk about this as well. Because we talk a lot about economic sovereignty, which basically is the freedom of a state to make its own economic choices. And I think this is something that Armenia has to kind of reclaim. I also think that it's important to take responsibility for the situation that we're facing today, because for many years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we as a state have not only been able to diversify our economic relations, but as a matter of fact, have also further deepened our structural economic dependencies, which are now very hard to address, as colleagues also explained, and unfortunately cannot be done fast. And obviously, this happened for a number of different reasons, including the reliance of the Armenian political elites on Russia. But still, I think this is important for the self-reflection, and is critical to be able to build valuable partnerships for the future. Talking about the dependencies and specifically talking about trade, despite the complexities and limitations that come with being a landlocked state with two closed borders, I think that there are a number of measures and policies that could be adopted and implemented to have a different picture, both when it comes to the structure of trade and also the volume of trade with other partners, including with the European Union. Colleagues mentioned a few. I think that these policies should, first of all, target value-added production. Tigran mentioned in his speech that, for example, in agriculture, processed food could be something to look at. I think that in general, value-added production is something that we have to target. Increased investment is also something that needs to be addressed. In general, globally, we see dramatic decrease in investments after the pandemic and geopolitical tensions everywhere. This is also the case in Armenia. We have seen increase in investments only mostly as a result of the relocation of certain high-tech businesses from Russia, but this is not sustainable. And I think in a more sustainable way, we have to address this issue, and we could totally do that in cooperation with our EU partners. And also improved institutional relations with other markets is important for the businesses to start exploring new markets, move out of their traditional comfort zone, and to try to see where else and what else they could do in terms of trade partnerships. Colleagues mentioned a number of commodities that Armenia has a lot of dependency in terms of the imports from the EU. And if in certain cases we have potential alternatives at the expense of higher prices, in case of energy, the situation is really very complex, and as rightly mentioned by Karina and Tigran, we don't have alternatives in terms of the infrastructure. I think this is also something that we could explore further with our colleagues in the EU. And when it comes to the partnership with EU, I think we also have some work to do in terms of moving from traditional aid, EU aid, to more strategic partnership and more strategic support to Armenia. And when I talk about this, I specifically mean the projects that are being implemented or have been launched that could have a strategic importance for the region, for the regional connectivity with the EU, to make sure that they do not leave any country behind, including Armenia behind. So I think that for a very long time, we have been playing this blame game, who's cooperating with who. Armenia is cooperating with Russia, EU is cooperating with Azerbaijan, and, criticizing each other for this and that. I think we have to completely change the discourse and understand how we could do this, how we could make it more strategic. And I see it this way. The EU talks a lot about its role in the region. It has adopted a new strategy, which is the Global Gateway Strategy. I think in real terms, this would mean funding specifically the projects that are of regional importance and making sure that no country, and by saying this, I mean also Armenia is not left behind. For example, recently there are a lot of discussions on Black Sea Undersea Cable project, which is a very complex project, and we don't know where the discussions are leading and when it will be implemented and how it will be implemented. But this is one example, because for decades, Armenia has been isolated by certain neighboring states when implementing strategic infrastructure projects, energy projects, road projects, etc. And this is a new project, and we have a new opportunity. And I do see the EU's role in impacting who's a party to that project, that or similar projects, because it is the European financial institutions that are going to fund these projects. And the states, the EU member states, have a lot of say in deciding what kind of projects to fund. And here, I think we have to move the discussion from political support to Armenia to more, strategic project-specific support. And in this case, making sure that Armenia is a party to this project, that every state in this region is a party to similar projects of strategic importance. And I only see it this way for the EU to continue being an important partner in terms of deciding or having an actual influence on the developments in the region, or on promoting peace through facilitating economic cooperation in the region. And I do see a lot of opportunities here as well. I think that's from me at this point. If there will be questions later on, I'll be happy to address.
Thank you very much, Mane. We have 8 questions already. And I think most of them are addressed to Tigran and Karina, but I see at least one also to Sergey. So maybe we start with a question on other barriers for trade with other potential partners, like differences in custom duties and transportation logistics costs. How can these be overcome if they are substantial vis-a-vis Russia? Tigran,
I'll probably take that question. There are a lot of barriers, of course, tariff barriers, logistical problems. The most obvious one is Armenia's membership in the Eurasian Economic Union, and that creates both opportunities economically, but also a lot of problems. For example, we discussed the oil dependency, petroleum dependency on Russia. More than 70% of Armenia's petroleum is coming from Russia. A couple of years ago, a new company entered the market, Shell, and in these 2 years, it has managed to take a share of the market, 7-8%. But the problem is that because of these tariffs that are imposed on these products coming from the EU, the price is higher. And that's a serious barrier for other companies, Western companies, entering the market. Of course, it's very hard, as we discussed during our in-person discussion. It's very hard to get rid of these tariffs, and it's not illegally. It's impossible, because Armenia is still part of the Eurasian Economic Union, and it cannot unilaterally to get rid of these tariffs. But if these tariffs didn't exist in this case, of course, we would have a more competitive petroleum market. We would have the same price with better quality, and it would have been easier to substitute the Russian petroleum, for example. The logistical problems are also a very important obstacle when it comes to export, for example. And one of our recommendations actually is addressing this problem. One of our respondents, who is a former official, has recommended to subsidize actually the logistical costs to these new markets, and also help the producers to get accustomed in these markets, to find these new markets. So that could be one solution. That's what we were meaning when we were talking about a more proactive stance on the part of the government. But yes, of course, there are a lot of logistical and other kind of problems.
Thank you very much, Tigran. This question is answered. Then we have a very interesting question on solar power, which is, of course, a great question for a Green Foundation. Of course, we want more solar power and not nuclear power, but we understand that Armenia is in a difficult situation where it needs as much own electricity generation as possible, and therefore is also considering a new nuclear power plant, which would not be supported by Russia, but probably by the US. The question is about the solar capacities, and that Armenia has developed so much that there is no longer absorption capacity, and there may not even be a need for a nuclear power plant. The person answering the question is confused. So do you have data about the proportion of solar and nuclear energy, and which one does Armenia need?
I can speak to a bit of that. I don't have the exact proportion of solar among renewables and overall, but I just wanted to say what the data that we do have shows, Armenian government is really, kind of prioritizing energy sustainability and reduced import dependency. So, renewables and increasing the share of renewables within the bigger picture is a stated priority by the Armenian government. And the goal currently stands at making the share of renewables to be 66% by 2036. So with that comes additional capacities of hydro, wind, and solar. And in terms of solar, we have the figure of 950 megawatts for solar to meet this target, along with the hydro and wind. And specifically, the Armenian government has identified residential heating and transport as an issue because they rely heavily on natural gas. And developing renewables, and particularly solar power would allow more easy kind of switching to renewable electricity and heating and transportation in the future. With regards to kind of reaching like absorption capacity, none of the experts that we spoke to mentioned that. In fact, a couple of our experts mentioned, or at least one expert mentioned, reaching capacity in terms of hydropower. Like there not being any room, like whatever we have is already kind of the capacity, which that's what we have from the experts. So not to, I wasn't able to kind of address that question directly, but that is the information that we have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions about military partnerships and diversification of arms supply. So there is one question about why specifically with the Czech Republic, and also two questions even about France. Are you also analyzing the relationship with France, or what advantages does the Czech Republic have compared to France, for example?
I'll probably go with this one. We specifically mentioned Czech Republic and India because we're about the problem of maintenance of old Soviet and Russian style weaponry and also providing interoperability. So that's why countries like Czech Republic, who have Soviet style weaponry and Soviet standard weaponry, can help Armenia to provide the maintenance. Because if we are talking about dependency in this area, of course there has been some progress in the last 2 years. It is an ad hoc progress, if we are being completely honest. Armenia has decided to look for something else because Russia wasn't able to provide or to deliver on the contract the two countries had signed before. But even with this new presence, with India and France emerging as major military and defense partners with Armenia, we still have a huge amount of weaponry systems that are of Soviet and Russian standard. So to mitigate the dependency on maintenance or from Russia, our recommendation was to work with countries like Czech Republic, with whom Armenia has some kind of dialogue going on these issues, and India also has a lot of weaponry that could serve as maintenance for Armenia. Regarding France, of course, it was a welcome development, and it was a opening for Armenia, because for many years none of the major Western powers was selling weaponry to Armenia and to Azerbaijan due to the conflict. Now, these very important contracts could open the door for Armenia for acquiring more Western weaponry and Western equipment, and that is the significance of this contract. But of course, in terms of efficiency as well, the systems we are acquiring, they are quite useful, and they are in line with Armenia's ongoing needs.
Thank you very much, Tigran. We have an interesting question, which I would maybe hand over to Sergey. Maybe also Mane, if you can say something about this on the Crossroads of Peace initiative. Well, part of the question is about how it is seen in Brussels, but also whether other elements other than opening roads and communications, I guess, could be added to the agenda, for example, water.
I think that we can see, and we should see this in a broader connectivity perspective, apart from the security and peace stabilizing role that it is playing. It could transform the whole Southern Caucasus, and this is the chances that we should be focusing on, as a region where the developments, as you know, are very unclear, and this initiative could become kind of a highlight in this. And as I mentioned, it is also about trying to have some positive dynamics vis-a-vis other actors like Turkey, but also it's not a very maybe not a very timely, not a very current actor from the European perspective, but yes, it is also about Iran, who is a neighbor and who is an actor vis-a-vis Armenia, with chances and potentials vis-a-vis Armenia, and there we will have to be clear and differentiating. Despite all the criticism that we have on the role of Iran in the Middle East, we understand that the role vis-a-vis Armenia is a little bit of a different dimension. So kind of giving it a positive and maybe a somewhat a different perspective on the dynamics in the region. This is how I see it, plus the connectivity dimension, not only water, but also other means that we're talking about, digital infrastructure as well, and energy infrastructure, kind of adding this and making this package. This would be great. The question is how realistic it is, but I think that the European Union should be supportive of such dynamics.
Thank you very much. Mane, we have one more question, which I might also direct to you, about potential avenues for expanding economic cooperation between the EU and Armenia. There's also a lot on that in the paper, and we've already heard a bit, but if you could also expand on that a bit, in which fields specifically you would see more potential, taking into account Armenia's membership in the Eurasian Economic Union.
Thank you. If I may comment first on the Crossroads of Peace initiative first. Well, basically, I think that the idea behind this project is, I mean, as the government of Armenia explains the project, right, is to ensure that there is peace in the region through economic integration and other kinds of integration. And I think this perfectly aligns with the EU Global Gateway Strategy. What the EU says basically is that it wants to invest in the rest of the world to ensure that the rest of the world is connected to Europe and is connected among each other through Europe. And it is ready to invest in all of these projects which are of strategic importance. What the government of Armenia says is that, which is nothing new, by the way, in terms of integration institutions elsewhere in the world, including the EU itself, which started through economic integrational processes and reached a certain point of integration. So what the government of Armenia says is that we need to make sure to ensure longer term peace in the region. We need to make sure that there are economic ties, and we need to invest in infrastructural projects, energy projects, and other kinds of projects. And what I'm saying is that the fact that it very well aligns with the EU strategies gives us the opportunity to explore what the EU could do, which could support this initiative. And I think this is something that we're perfectly in line. And when I was talking about the energy projects, including the Black Sea Undersea Cable project, I think this is something that is an example right now that there is a project, there are actors, there is the EU, which is one of them, one of the most interested parties, taking into account the energy crisis in Europe, and also considering the global gateway strategy that it has, to see whether we would be able, in practical sense, implement all these strategic objectives in terms of supporting projects of this kind and ensuring that they are inclusive for this part of the world, and make sure that it achieves the ultimate goal of supporting peace, of supporting global connectivity, which is one of the objectives in the global gateway strategy of the EU. Now, coming to trade and promoting the economic ties between the EU and Armenia, and colleagues have mentioned a number of things. I also tried to mention a few things. I think that it's important to explore the sectors where Armenia has a competitive advantage and see how we could take a step up in these sectors. And when I talk about this, I specifically mean the value-added production. First of all, to be able to promote trade, we need to understand what we're selling in general, what Armenia exports, what Armenia imports, and where the alternatives are, and what we could do to change that if we want to switch the markets and decrease the dependency on the Russian market. And for that, I think value-added production is critical, and addressing this issue is important. Making sure that whatever we export, specifically if we talk about agricultural sector, fresh fruits and vegetables, we need to see how we could process them, how we could make them value-added products and export to new markets, including the European markets. Increased investments are important, because I think to be able to basically export something, we first of all need to increase the production, and for that investments are critical. And the global dynamics of decreased investments everywhere, including in Armenia, is worrying. And I think we need to also work on the development of policies that address this issue. And improved institutional connections is also very important for the Armenian businesses to have easier access to the European markets, because as colleagues also explained to us, there are a number of issues. They are traditionally very comfortable in these markets. They know these markets. They know how to operate in these markets. Language barriers, etc., etc. all of this we have to be addressed also with an institutional support. Institutionally, where we have the Armenian state on the one hand and the EU institutions on the other hand. We could also, engage other actors. There are business associations, there are, chambers of commerce, etc. So we need to see how we could promote these connections to help the businesses to enter new markets and not to be afraid to explore these opportunities. When it comes to energy, I think we first of all need to understand very carefully and very fundamentally all the dependencies and all the challenges that we're facing, including understanding the issues that we have infrastructure-wise in Armenia, and when it comes to the connectivity, and see how we could address this in a longer term, and obviously start working on that for a longer term perspective, understanding that we won't be able to dramatically change the situation in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manu, for this comprehensive wrap-up, so to speak. I would just like to thank Sergei Lagodinsky because he has to run to his next meeting. Thank you so much for joining us, and I really hope we will have more chances. I'm sure we will have more chances to discuss the situation in the region with you. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the great report.
Thank
We'll
you.
stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And we'll have a few more minutes. We won't make it long, but maybe 5 more minutes to answer some of the remaining questions, if that's okay with the panelists. There is one question about land ownership, because you talked about the expansion of agriculture. If you have any information on whether it is mostly small land holdings, or the land which is uncultivated is owned by big landowners, and also if there is enough water for the cultivation of that land. This is quite specific already, but maybe you have some information about that.
We don't really have data on that, but I don't think it's owned by big landowners. This is like a claim without evidence, but that's my feeling. Also, to the production of wheat, of course, water is needed, but it's not as intensive, the production process, as with other products. I could say that some of our recommendations have already been tried by the Armenian government, like subsidizing the price of I don't know how many percent they did, but in our recommendation is 30%. I think it had really good results, but I'm hearing that this year they're not going to do that because of economic calculus, and that's worrying because this is a strategic product, and if we want to have food security and safety, of course, we should be prioritizing the products we are most dependent on and not look at economic cost and benefits calculations.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question about demographic issues, which is a bit unrelated to our topic, I guess. But maybe there is a link which I don't see at the moment. So what steps are taken to address Armenia's demographic issues, and how effective do you believe state policy is in this area? I mean, it's partially related, of course, because to economic issues and also to Russia. Would you like to say something on that?
Well, yeah, it is out of the scope of the report, so we won't be able to provide any credible data as well. But I think the other questions in the comment section are kind of related to this question. For example, the integration of Karabakh Armenian refugees could be one of the solutions. We could discuss that, but it's a completely different topic, and we could spend a couple of more hours discussing the government's policies and the interim results.
Yeah, but this is also something that we are very interested in as a foundation, especially the political integration of refugees from Karabakh, Armenia, because it is true what the commentator said, that the links between Nagorno-Karabakh and Russia were also very close. So how to deal with that? There are no...
Can I have a short intervention, Sonia?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, regarding the links between Nagorno-Karabakh and Russia, I think these claims have been made for many years, but there is no actual evidence supporting that claim. There is no evidence supporting the claim that Nagorno-Karabakh was more pro-Russian than, let's say, some region in Armenia, especially after the latest ethnic cleansing. I mean, at this point, Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians are probably the most anti-Russian segment of the Armenian society. There was a question about security and Karabakh Armenia. I think this is one thing we could add, that you've all heard about the latest decision to remove the Russian border guards from the checkpoint on the border with Iran. And the government's explanation why it's not being done on the entire border, at least behind closed doors, is that we don't have trained professionals who could fulfill that function. I think a lot of Karabakh Armenians are capable of fulfilling that function if they are properly trained. And this is not just a catastrophe, but also an opportunity for Armenia to use the skills and the knowledge of the refugee population to solve some of the problems Armenia faces, especially in the area of security.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting point. And with that, I would like to close the webinar. Actually, we could discuss this topic for much longer, but I would recommend you to all our attendees to read the report. It's available on the Regional Center for Democracy and Security's website. And feel free to contact our panelists or us if you have any further questions. It is a bit difficult to summarize this discussion, which is very complex, in a few words. But I would just like to say that what has become very clear for me is that while Armenia is in a difficult situation with its dependence on Russia in trade, security, and energy, there are very concrete things that Armenia can do, and that can also be supported by the EU. In this regard, the Armenian government needs to be proactive, and at the same time, when it comes to more political questions of EU-Armenia relations, a point that Sergei made very strongly, both sides, Armenia and the EU, should move with political caution and sensitivity, given the risks that exist for Armenia. And the fact that this diversification process is a long-term process, or at least medium-term process. Thank you all for participating. We will upload the recording, and you can rewatch or share with others who might be interested. And again, I would recommend you to read the report, which is available on RCDS's website. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our panelists, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.